Hopefully our colleagues online have already joined us here for the final session for today. I understand I stand between you and an airplane mostly, or a train, or possibly a car home if you're lucky enough to live locally. I would say something in response to Professor Kalmer's notes this morning that I missed an event a couple of months ago because I was circling the air around Brisbane, but I'll pass on that one. My name's Chris Burke. I'm a Gamilaroi fella who's had the privilege of living on Ngunnawal country in Canberra for the last 30 years. I lead the Indigenous Science and Engagement program at CSIRO, but before that I had the privilege to serve in the ACT Legislative Assembly for 5.5 years, including holding a number of ministerial portfolios, most particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs, as well as working for the Australian Healthcare and Hospitals Association, leading their policy work around Indigenous health. Before that I spent 30 years working in dental practice, Aboriginal medical services, government dental clinics, and in my own private practice in Canberra. I also have the pleasure of being an honorary professor at this university. But enough about me and more about CSIRO. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our Indigenous Science and Engagement program as it aligns with the theme, or one of the themes of this conference, of building Indigenous researcher capability across the science space in Australia. Back in 2019, after extensive internal and external consultation, CSIRO developed a vision for an Indigenous Science and Engagement program which is going to be a disruptive and sustainable change at CSIRO that drives a different way of engaging with communities than we've done in the past. We've been around for over 100 years and we've had deep and respectful relationships with some communities across Australia that have gone on for decades producing wonderful work, but that needs to be built out so that we can become truly Australia's national science agency for all Australians and delivering the kind of 21st century thinking aligned with the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples and the 2020 Close the Gap Agreement, which embeds respectful partnerships delivering the kind of outcomes that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are interested in. When I joined CSIRO in 2021, I said this is a fabulous vision. What's it going to look like when we get there? And of course, that means we need to build capability. We need to have more people leading research, more Indigenous people leading research at CSIRO. We need to get Indigenous cultural and intellectual property protected, as I talked about in our questions this morning, and building upon the perspectives and issues that are important to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Getting more Indigenous scientists on board, we've got over 40 already, and enabling capability with more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff. Really thinking about how we can enable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to benefit from their Indigenous estate. That's the 40% of the land and water mass that's already controlled by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through land agreements, native title and other means, and really looking at how we can support communities to initiate and co-design projects with us. So I've got a small team. There's 14 of us. All positions were identified as for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so we've got tremendous cultural capability in the team, working across the various levers across CSIRO to affect this change. Notably a specialist talent team, getting our communications correct both internally and externally, an Office of Indigenous Engagement looking after our work around National Reconciliation Week and deriving cultural awareness and learning for our non-Indigenous staff, doing our NAIDOC Week functions, really getting those things going across the organisation. A research grants program that drives the kind of research in the way that we're looking for with Indigenous leadership, working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to deliver outcomes that they're interested in, and assisting our Indigenous scientists and researchers to do the work that they see as important. Of course, there's always a business side to this. We need to assist those Indigenous businesses who want science and technology solutions to deliver better outcomes for the organisation, as well as reaching out to our colleagues across the university sector, where we can, of course, align with Indigenous researchers in universities, as well as looking for potential workforce to come into CSIRO. I mean, we know there's over 400 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students graduating from STEM programs across the country every year. An opportunity to come to CSIRO is something I'll talk a little bit more about shortly. So one of the things we've been doing is looking where those projects are, and then really drilling into some detail about the projects, which is already available for information available for CSIRO staff, and then using those case study reports to inform Indigenous Australia about what we're doing. But once again, focusing on those ideas of Indigenous leadership, co-design, addressing issues that have been raised by communities and people, and delivering benefit as defined by community. And we could go into that map and sort of have a look at what's happening at that particular project, and that provides a great level of information for CSIRO people to be able to connect and form connections through. So what sort of projects are we doing? I mean, we've got over 60 projects happening across the country right now. I really like this Saving Baby Turtles one, not just because it's got a catchy title and there's some horrible looking pigs stampeding through a swamp there, which tells you really what this project's about. It's about finding where the piggies are and getting them away from the baby turtle nests, because in some parts of Western Cape York, they just eat all the eggs. They eat all the eggs, and there's no turtles at all. Rangers came to us 10 years ago and said, what can you do about this? So we worked with them and Microsoft as part of the NEST program, enabling rangers to gather images using drones, upload them, and then using AI and a digital twinning mode to use that Indigenous knowledge to work out where the piggies are going to be, and then go and do something about them. Native Secrets, a New South Wales Region Telstra Business Awards winner only a couple of weeks ago. This is an Indigenous company based near Dubbo who came to us and said, we need some help to find better ways to do business and to be able to extract oils from native plants for making skincare products, and possibly looking at some antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory activities. And then mHealth, mobile health, using personal health monitoring equipment with an app to provide information not just to the patient but also to their Aboriginal medical service. So really a scoping study that looks if this can be done in a culturally safe and respectful manner. And that was the central outcome of that piece of research led by our eHealth team based in Brisbane. Also looking at how we can protect Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. For an example is the seasonal calendars, which we've had on our website for a number of years, following requests from traditional owners who wanted to share their knowledge and to be acknowledged for that, of course. So we worked with them to develop the seasonal calendars, which you can go to our website and see. But then we found that other people were downloading the images and then using them for their own purposes without acknowledging the traditional owners. This is a serious problem. It's an infringement of their Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights. So what we did, we used a bit of contract law. So we took it all down, we put up some website conditions for sharing. You have to sign on and acknowledge that you are going to use these images in a correct manner and properly acknowledge the knowledge holders, and then you can use them according to the conditions that are provided there. This is really a useful way to manage particularly larger organisations, access to Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. And of course, as I said at the start, talking about employment and developing capability, we've a range of tools that I talked about, not just the Indigenous Specialist Talent Team, but we've also started using identified positions. We've got postgraduate scholarships. We launched a graduate entry program a couple of weeks ago. We've got summer vacation scholarships, including an Indigenous Time at Sea program on our MV Investigator, which is absolutely fantastic opportunity. Cadetships, as you'd expect, traineeships, the Indigenous Young Women's STEM Academy, which we're running for the next 8 years, and individual targets within the organisation, all aligned at achieving the 3% Commonwealth target, but really within the framework of developing capability. And those are the elements that we've introduced recently to support our push. The graduate entry program is a pathway to increase the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander STEM workforce. As I said, we know there's 400 or more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people graduating from Australian universities each year with a STEM qualification: engineering, architecture, IT, physical sciences, environmental sciences. We're going to connect those people with programs inside SARA, pay them a proper wage whilst they're there. This is not an internship program. Run them through SARA for 18 months and then aggressively career manage them into a PhD or research masters, or find another job for them in SARA, or indeed within the rest of the Commonwealth science portfolios. We've got over 100 projects that have been identified by our teams to date, and we're looking for 25 people in the first tranche in the recent launch. So if you can see that on LinkedIn or Seek or somewhere, please share it with your colleagues and friends and connections. So there's two streams. There's of course the prospective as researcher stream that I talked about before, but there's also recognising that we employ lawyers, accountants, comms people, all the other things that you expect a large organisation with 5,500 people spread across 55 sites to manage. And finally, there's some of the kinds of projects that we're looking at. Some have specific Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander aspects, others do not, and it's really an opportunity for people to look across the smorgasbord of SARA and look for the kind of science areas that we're interested in and see whether that aligns with where they want to go and the skills that they want to develop. And that's it from me. And now we'll have some questions when we get to the panel, but I'm just going to introduce the next speaker. And the next speaker is Professor Veena Sajwala, who's the NESP Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub leader. And Professor Sajwala is an internationally recognised materials scientist engineer. And there's just a couple of things I did note from her CV, which is extensive and laudable, that she was the 2022 New South Wales Australian of the Year in recognition for her work, and was also named the 2022 Australian Museum Eureka Prize winner for the Celestino Eureka Prize for promoting understanding of science, and has also been awarded an Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering Clooney's Ross Innovation Award. Over to you, Professor.
Thanks very much, Chris. I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, and pay my respects and recognize the fact that, you know, Indigenous people have been caring for our country for a long, long time, and I do want to pay my respects to leaders present and emerging, and of course those in the past who have taken care of this beautiful land on which we are gathering here today. For me personally, it is a connection that actually goes straight to the heart of what I think we need to do, and this is where our hub can play such an important role. Our Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub is really all about ultimately how we bring people together, how we bring communities together, how we actually address holistic solutions to those challenges around waste and air quality and our environment. All of these are interconnected because they have an impact on our health, our well-being, and of course, some of the stories that I've heard from so many of my Indigenous partners who collaborate with us in our Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub comes out of those simple conversations where we do listen to what our partners are telling us. A simple example I would love to share with you is when I remember Ted, who had finished speaking, and sort of approached me, a lovely Indigenous leader in his community, said, well, actually, you're doing all of this fabulous work. What if we could set up some of these things in our community? Because I think immediately in his mind, it was very much about the fact that if waste is seen as a valuable resource, and if waste can actually motivate community members to see new opportunities. So it's not just about, let's clean up waste from our environment. The important question is, of course, you have to remove it from our environment. You have to stop the pollutants getting there in the first place. But if you're going to manage it properly, what do you do with it? Is there an opportunity here? Is waste really a valuable resource? And can it become an opportunity so that we can actually put that back into production? And again, why does it matter? It matters because, of course, you think about materials like plastics. If they, as a waste product, just simply end up polluting our environment, we know it will end up in our land, in our air, in our water. And of course, that's not what we want. But on the other hand, you can see it as a valuable material. I mean, plastics are being used in so many different ways. We have to understand the ways in which it presents itself in our everyday lives, whether it's in our electronic goods, whether it's in our cars. And of course, one might say, if you've seen synthetic turf, it's in your synthetic turf as well. So there you go. I can see Roby going, ooh, eyebrows going up. Yes, indeed. That's really the reason why I wanted to kind of give all of these examples. And of course, all the different kinds of plastics that are prevalent in our environment. Absolutely, we have to reduce the consumption of what I might call the unnecessary plastics. But on the other hand, when we think about how all these plastics that are now present, as we know, even in our clothes, right? The synthetic polymers that are there in our clothes, we know that textile waste and microparticles generated from tires, all the tire dust and all the other plastics that contribute to our environment come from all of those goods that we all use. So how do we manage it? So it's back to that initial story that I was telling you about with Ted. And really for us, the answer was, if indeed the kinds of scientific and technological solutions that are being developed, then what if we could actually work together and really deploy some of these solutions in our communities? But most importantly, the motivation and the excitement and the opportunities that could come out of that would be enormous, because suddenly it would be about the excitement around the environment and recycling and of course, creating new jobs. There are many, many young people who, of course, want to imagine what jobs might look like in their communities. But of course, if we look at the entire life cycle of all these products that we're talking about, this is exactly where the conversation with Ted evolved over a period of time, which was, okay, but if we could actually convert these plastics into valuable resources, and if it was taken out of the environment before it caused a problem, if it became part of the manufacturing system, then of course what we have achieved is a win-win outcome. Social benefits, because of course we've created new jobs, and of course environmental outcomes as well. And to do that, to achieve that, we have to of course listen to our communities. What would they like to do with it? So for example, in this particular community, Ted mentioned to me that they do have a place where 3D printing happens. So we said, okay, what if we could convert those plastics into plastic filaments, and those plastic filaments were then being fed into 3D printers. And that's exactly the kinds of things that we're working towards, is developing those collective solutions. And of course, making sure that it's not just about the science that happens in our labs and in our micro factories, but it's very much about how we then translate a lot of that and work with communities to show that it is absolutely possible to show that the connectivity between what happens in our environment and of course minimizing the impact of waste, minimizing the impact of pollution, and of course ultimately we also know that, you know, to be able to deliver a healthy planet, we need to of course achieve all these outcomes in a holistic way. So the vision, what our hub is really doing, is bringing together all the stakeholders, you know, showing that we can actually have user-focused, end-user-focused solutions, both from a scientific and a community perspective. And ultimately, of course, where our hub is focusing on, to bring it right back to the three main thematic areas on sustainable communities and the fantastic work that is happening as part of the air quality project, that I want to acknowledge, of course, Amanda and Faye for all the fabulous work that they're doing. And I think I've got a signal to finish up, so I will. Shortly, I want to also acknowledge Melita for her leadership when we started out this program in the hub. I want to acknowledge really all our partners, our stakeholders through the various programs, our local councils. We work at the local grassroots level. All of those amazing businesses, those businesses that are there in regional and remote communities, that is important. If we have to see waste as a resource, we need to be able to make sure that we put all the systems in place. So not only do we collect and pull them out of the environment as a pollutant, but we also look at remanufacturing. And ultimately, the holistic solution requires us to be able to look at how we might be able to deploy solutions that are fit for purpose. So looking at socioeconomic challenges, looking at technological challenges, we know we can bring it all together. Fit-for-purpose solutions look after communities, reduce the impact on environment, and create new jobs. So I might just pause at this slide just to be able to share with you the fact that there are many, many different ways through which we all collaborate and work together. Our colleagues across the country in various institutions and CSIRO, of course. Thank you for really hosting this incredibly fantastic event. I want to acknowledge, of course, you know, the work that Amanda has done pulling this together, and the team that has pulled this incredibly fantastic day together. It is through these kinds of collaborative efforts that, of course, we deliver on these solutions for our communities. But if we can see it in a holistic way, pulling that waste out of our environment, and of course making sure that they don't end up contributing to all those microparticles and microplastics, and you hear about all of these things and you go, well, clearly we need to be able to understand fundamentally the science, and of course how we can address some of those challenges in a practical way so that we can deliver those holistic benefits for a healthy, connected, prosperous set of communities in our urban, regional and Indigenous communities. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sajwala. Now I'll call upon Josh Waters. Josh is a proud Gamilaroi man with more than a decade of experience working in science, education, communication and research. Currently he has a full-time role facilitating an inaugural partnership between Deadly Science and the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. He's also an academic and a storyteller. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, everybody. I'll start off by saying Yamang Indai Gaba, Galigalga Garingea, Gamilaroi Dawandi Dralingea, Kavangunugu Walai Dralingea, Giri Lutu Waraldanangin in I Dawandi, Nini Winangalwa Nandi Dianani Gomlong Yananya. Acknowledging the first people of this place and their continuing sovereignty as this land was never ceded. I will say also that I am tremendously underprepared. I don't have any presentation or anything. I didn't realise that I was giving a presentation. But I will draw on those storytelling abilities as best as I can to try and give you a little bit of an idea of what we're up to within Deadly Science and the partnership that has been procured through WeHi. They're based in Melbourne, one of the largest biomedical science research institutions in the world. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And some of the work that is carried out within the WeHi context, particularly within Indigenous communities, addressing what we all know to be disproportionate health statistics that plague our people for all types of reasons. But the approach within this context is to ensure that there's some continuity there. So I've heard a lot of themes come up today, and some I'm really pleased to hear. And as part of that, one of the things that I did hear mentioned, and that has been a theme throughout the day, is the continuity and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander scientists existing on a spectrum or a continuum, as we know, and as Deadly Science does like to pronounce, and WeHi has taken it on board, that Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the first scientists of this continent, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that is the case, and there's a lot of ideas that sort of organise around that as well, particularly around Indigenous knowledge systems and their capacity their presence on this landscape, but then also their presence with, I think, contemporary society and how they're being used to address contemporary and modern problems and issues that we all face that none of us can sort of ignore or shy away from, and one of those obviously is air quality. So within that, just a bit of background on the program. So it'll be, I think it was June last year that the partnership was announced. So WeHi allocated a significant amount of money to Deadly Science to run a Deadly Science Pathways program within the Institute, and as part of that a role was created, which is the role that I currently am in, which is the program manager. So essentially it's my role to develop, design and implement the Deadly Science Pathways program within WeHi. So what that will look like, it's still in its pilot phase, but currently experimenting with a number of different ideas about how we can make sure that we're not sort of reproducing something that already exists, and there's a number of programs that target Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people of all age groups. Many of you will be familiar with Deadly Science and the work that we do with primary age schools and students. So building on that work, there's an opportunity there to make sure that we're looking at the next phase in that. Obviously, well, not obviously, I wish it was obvious, but when we look at the data and statistics that pertain to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people in secondary settings, you can see that continuing on from similar trends that we see within that primary age group, NAPLAN results 3 to 5, similar pattern exists within the secondary setting, in that Indigenous students are underperforming as a cohort at around half the rate of their non-Indigenous peers. And if you look at science particularly, grades 7 to 9, those NAPLAN areas will often show you that there's an achievement gap of around about 2 years. And that's sort of compounded a little bit if you're male and if you're Indigenous, as opposed to non-Indigenous and non-Indigenous male and female counterparts. So there's significant gaps there, and they do need to be addressed. So one of the ways that we're looking to contribute to that, addressing that gap, is to have students come in to WeHi and participate in a Pathways program. We'll draw students from all across the country, and they'll come in and spend 3 days at WeHi listening to scientists throughout the Institute, and we'll do a couple of lab tours, and we'll visit the GTAC, so the Gene Technology Advancement Centre, and then have some conversations about exposing some of those students to science, education and employment related pathways and STEM pathways, and also, as I mentioned, biomedical science pathways. I guess one thing that I'll highlight within that is the point of differentiation. So as I mentioned, we don't want to sort of double up on things that are already out there, but we do want to target students who might not otherwise have that opportunity. So rather than looking at high achievement and high performing Indigenous students from across the country. We'll be looking at those students, not to exclude those, but we also have an interest and high engagement Indigenous students as well. And a story that I usually tell around that is about a young girl in one of the Aboriginal remote communities that we work with, when a teacher asked her about why she's interested in science, and she wasn't necessarily the best, most high performing student that we've come across, but she did say that she sees her elders and her ancestors when she looks at science and when she does science and when she explores, goes through using the scientific method to come up with ideas and asking questions and making observations across her country. So that's something that we really want to capitalise on and make sure that we are supporting that process. So I will pretty much finish up there unless anybody's got any questions. I have a plane to catch very soon, so I don't want to miss that. But I appreciate it.
Josh won't be able to stay with us for the panel that we're going to have shortly, so if you do have any questions for him, now's your opportunity. Yes, question.
Josh, thank you. That's really fantastic work, and I'd love to find out a bit more. When you talk about learning, I guess what's interesting, I guess from my perspective, I'm just wondering whether you're putting, there's that element of learning by doing and getting young people excited about science through the actual sort of engagement and involvement in hands-on activities, and of course their passion for the environment and all of that. Are these approaches built in to kind of the learning experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just mentioned outside that we really want to make sure that it's a pragmatic approach and not denying like the theoretical and philosophical underpinnings of science and how that can kind of shape what you do as in your practice. We really want to draw on ways that we can, bring science into the classroom, but also take students out on country to make sure that there's not that compromise that's made. We're outside, so we're not doing science. We're inside, so we're not doing country. Whereas the approach is inclusive of both of those, and it kind of exists and kind of oscillates between the classroom and both classrooms, because they're both classrooms, but inside and outside. So part of that, we've been working with Robertson River communities, around looking at their traditional plants that they've used to create soap or explore like saponification in those traditional plant-based contexts, and getting them to do actually make soap out of using their traditional plants, and then doing some comparative analysis around whether that soap is better at eradicating bacteria as opposed to commercial soap, and looking at the results of that and the outcomes, and being able to refine those processes as well, because that's part of science. And then there could be opportunities there for those communities to generate an income stream through that. But obviously we've got responsibilities around ICRP and that sort of stuff, and protecting those communities from being exploited if those resources are shared. And then just the general mechanisms of exposing students to science as well. So we did a SEQ STEM tour last week where we took a pretty high-powered microscope around to schools and students' faces. I had a look at the photos this morning. You really see it on their faces. They're so engaged, being able to see, and I went around to the windowsills. I'm a massive insect nerd, so I grabbed a couple of insects and we put them under the microscope, and one of them was still alive, and then we found a spider. So really generating that interest and excitement through engaging mechanisms that I think everybody's fascinated by. It really changes your perspective around the world when you see when you see that a spider has a face, but you don't see that because your eyes aren't sort of tuned into what that looks like, or being able to see that at that detail, at that level. But being able to bring that to students to really generate that interest and excitement is the key starting point, I think, for them, and that's Indigenous communities are no exception to that. So getting them to see the relevance, getting them to see the purpose and the meaning and the excitement of science is the key point of entry.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll all join with me again in thanking Josh for that wonderful impromptu performance and give him another round of applause as he leaves the building. Now, we're getting close to the panel, but we still have another speaker who is, I understand, online that I'm going to introduce in a moment. Oh, okay. Okay, all right. Well, then it's over to the panel and time for On the Couch.
Yet. What do you want it?
Hi, it's Terrace.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. One of the things that we just heard from Josh is about the opportunities for young people to learn about what it's like to have a career in research or science. And that reminds me of a discussion that I had with Misty Jenkins, the Wiradjuri researcher at Associate Professor Misty Jenkins, who's a cancer researcher at Weehai and a Wiradjuri woman, around the idea that many young Indigenous people have an understanding of what it's like to be a doctor or a teacher or a nurse or even, for heaven's sakes, a dentist. But a researcher, what's that? And just reflecting upon what Josh was saying and what we're doing at SARA about building that Indigenous research capability, which is one of the key themes for the conference, is where is there across the landscape that we can look for that opportunity to engage with Indigenous communities and peoples to say there is this thing called research that actually is a real job that you can do for the rest of your life and actually have a lot of fun doing it. So what would be your perspective on that, Satiris?
Thank you, Chris. May I start from acknowledging the country I'm coming from. At the moment, I'm based in Nunal and Gabri country here in Canberra, and I would like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging of this country, and also to my colleagues, Indigenous investigators, in particular from the Hill Network, and then I'm privileged to share the panel with Veronica Matthews, who's there. Hi, Veronica. And also with Auntie Linda Ford, who spoke earlier in the day. It's about our Indigenous leads. And just to reiterate that Indigenous knowledge and science and culture is the cornerstone of the Hill Network, which I'm representing today. And there are, by the way, many other colleagues in the room, which I would like to acknowledge. But I would like to respond to your point, and also to say that I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I really enjoyed the discussion during the day today. So I have two young children. They often ask me, what it means to be a researcher, and what it means to be a scientist, and my take on this is that researcher is somebody who's trying to make life easier and more beautiful and healthier for other people, and it's an exciting job. And it's not only curiosity driven; it's driven by the need to improve health, improve well-being, improve our lives, and improve the environment. I don't come from a traditional academic background. I work for government, local authorities, NGOs. So I think what is important to highlight is that research doesn't mean that you have to be locked up in a library or behind a computer all day. It means that importantly that we engage with communities, with people, with other professionals, with decision makers, with students, and try to find solutions which improve everybody's life. I think a take-home message from this discussions today is also around the need to to protect people's health from air pollution, of course, and bushfires, but also to improve equity, health equity. And I would like to reflect on that a little bit. And of course, this is also related to the research many of us are doing in this room. We have that air pollution affects everybody. We know from the latest reports from the World Health Organization that there are no safe levels of air pollution, but not everybody is equally affected by air pollution. And this is because some people are more sensitive, people with asthma, people with pre-existing illness, young children, pregnant women, elderly people. So the air pollution affects those groups more heavily, disproportionately, and also affects affects people living in disadvantaged communities, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities more heavily. So people living in busy motorways, people living near industrial or waste disposal sites. So we need to be aware that air pollution affects more heavily these communities. Importantly, indigenous communities are heavily affected by air pollution. This could be because of living in inadequate housing, could be in the city, but also in the remote communities. Many of these remote communities, Aboriginal communities, rely on diesel generators for energy, and diesel generators are polluting, are expensive, are not environmentally friendly, and of course there is a key issue there, which is about energy insecurity and housing insecurity for those communities. I would also like to say that environmental degradation, we have droughts in parts of the country, we have floods in other parts of the country, mining activities, all these activities which will have an impact on the country, as we had earlier today, can deteriorate, can affect air quality, and can affect exposure of people, especially communities living in substandard housing and remote and rural communities. So just to say that being a scientist, being a researcher means that we try to improve the life of people, we try to improve equity, try to improve the life of people who are disproportionately affected by environmental hazards. And this is in the heart of the HEAL network, which, as we heard earlier from Veronica, is a broad coalition of many investigators from across Australia, many institutions, including universities, CSIRO, government departments. It's a broad alliance of people who are trying to work together and identify, evaluate, and help implement solutions which will improve life and well-being and improve the environment.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Over to you.
Thank you, Satiris, and a great introduction to that work that you're involved in there. Just coming to you, Veronica, we've heard quite a few diverse themes throughout the forum today. How do you think we can pull that together into a cohesive statement or body, thinking around that what I've just talked about and Josh was talking about with developing Indigenous research capability, thinking about those cultural and social determinants of health and how they cultural factors are in that space of making people's lives better and social determinants having negative impacts. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, to the original question, which I think is how to make research sexy, pretty much. I think as a broader sort of society issue, and it's not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, we sort of need to make superheroes out of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander scientists that we do have, because as the adage goes, you can't be what you can't see, right? And I think Deadly Science does that quite well, and CSIRO, I'm very impressed by your research capacity strengthening program, which provides that pathway. But what I don't see necessarily in the health sector is that those same sort of programs to really generate the enthusiasm to become a health researcher. And to go to your question then about developing a holistic sort of program of environmental change and health research. I think we need to work together more closely as we go forward. There is a new special initiative that has also been funded by the NHMRC called OCA, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Researchers Network. And they've been charged with doing exactly that, you know, sort of building those pathways from community into health research careers. So it doesn't have the sort of resource backing that CSIRO would have. But given that you guys have been at it for a while, it'd be great to team up and learn from you about what works best and what are some of the, you know, things to avoid perhaps.
Yeah, that's a really interesting theme, thinking about how what in some circles is termed community researchers, or in the environmental space could be Indigenous rangers, can have the opportunity, if that's what they want to do, to develop different research skills from what they already have, and gain those university qualifications that can provide other career options or opportunities for them. So yeah, I think there's a very interesting pathway potentially through vocational education and training, using recognition of prior learning, but also the opportunity for our tertiary institution colleagues to develop some innovative research-specific postgraduate type programs that can take people from different backgrounds and capabilities to enable them to become researchers. So I think there's a big opportunity there.
And there are programs in various universities that do offer that for a health researcher perspective, you know, that community researcher pathway. But I suppose the objective of the OCA network is really to pull all of that effort together so we can leverage the resources behind it. But I think an added value would be working with our STEM colleagues as well in that process.
Great. We might just find out if there's any questions online or in the audience. No? Okay, good. Professor?
Yes. Just call me Vina.
Vina?
We keep it nice and simple, Chris.
Absolutely. Professor Vina, what is your take on this? Or would you like to take the discussion somewhere else?
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, it's all of these points that we're talking about, right? Ultimately, if we want to be able to get young people excited to make a contribution, whether it is in the health space or environment, I think they've got to be able to see the fact that no matter where they study, no matter what kind of subjects they choose, what is that pathway to impact? You know, where am I going to actually see myself? You know, whether I want to become a researcher, whether I want to work in the labs or in industry, I think the ability for people to see that there are lots of opportunities is important. So getting a bit of that taste and experience, you know, when you're in high school, for example, you know, you don't have to wait till you kind of might finish high school. I would even say, you know, if you can really start at that stage where in your high school you might have a few days where, you know, your school has got provisions to go off and do a bit of internship in labs and so on. You know, come into various lab space, into whether it's at CSIRO or different universities, or indeed in our communities, you know, to be able to learn, you know, where the needs are. So, you know, you spend time listening to the needs of your communities, but also work together in collaboration to bring practical solutions to the table. I think to me that is a great way. I mean, one of the things that, you know, we want to be able to do as we collaborate with various community groups and industries in our Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub is to be able to show that we can indeed have these technological solutions. They can be easy to operate. They can be things that community members and kids get excited about it, because again, when you see something actually happening in front of your eyes, that excitement is there. Hey, I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, so suddenly it goes from being a theoretical concept to being something that's real, and equally importantly, something that's doable. Now, you may or may not pursue that particular pathway, but you know, that example I was giving earlier about, you know, this gentleman from the community, I mean, for him, he immediately went into and he said, well, this particular fruit, you know, people don't see it that often because it's very seasonal. But imagine if we could 3D print that. Now, it could have been a very simple example, but I guess as we were starting to talk about it, what it means is you're taking, you know, something that is easy to be mobile in the way technologies are these days, very decentralized and easy to operate and use. But again, the point of that being that when kids actually are given the opportunity to engage and work in that space, you know, there are no limits to your imagination. So you almost can see the challenges, but you kind of think about solutions, and do that as a pathway to showing that, look, I could be a researcher working in the medical space, I could be somebody who is manufacturing products for housing solutions.
Great.
You know, I've got my bag here.
A prop.
A prop, totally. Because I've been referring to 3D printing,
Okay.
and I've been referring to plastic filaments, and I thought, well, you know, actually I'm going to bring my props along, right? So this is what is a filament that's made out of 100% waste plastic.
Yep.
And by the time you've converted that into this form, which is this filament, 3D printers are pretty standard, affordable. Kids are doing it in school, can do it in school if their schools don't have it. They can effectively go, right, so here's an environmental problem that used to be a problem.
Yep.
I've now got this into an opportunity. These can go into various applications.
Yep.
So you're looking at solutions and challenges, but I guess that practical solution, that excitement of going into your school and designing things, because you'll
Yes.
be designing things yourself then.
And I think, therefore, you've just taken us from that circle of waste through inspiring young people
Yep.
and closed off that loop beautifully. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
think that we're going to call it quits there for our panel now. I need to go and do some thank yous. Thank you.
A
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you. And that's it for our session, but I shall now just make some thank yous. And I have to acknowledge and thank Deadly Science, Asthma Australia, and of course, Lyra Moore, our visual scribe. Thank you so much. Over to you, John.
We're drawing to a close, and I'd just like to thank Chris for stepping in and facilitating that panel at short notice. We're really very grateful for that. And I'd also like to just thank Professor Tom Kalmer for being with us today. I know he couldn't make it for the last session, but we're just really very grateful for his time. I just wanted to let everyone know that we will have some outcomes from the day. We plan to draw together a summary of some of the key themes of the day, some of the key questions that have been mentioned online and in the room. We've got a map of all the different collaborations and the people that have supplied details as part of registration, and so we'll draw that together. And we'll also, our amazing visual facilitator, Lyra, is going to provide us some beautiful illustrations that we will also include as part of that summary as well. And so if anyone wants to be part of that who's online, they can contact us or just email me at john.skinner@mq.edu.au, and we'd love to have you be with us. As Chris mentioned, Deadly Science and Wollongongo gave us all the merch for our speaker packs, and we're really grateful for that. And I also just wanted to thank the team from NES, Peel and Girali and Wollongongo and the Indigenous Science Engagement team for all their help drawing this day together. It's been great. And I also just wanted to repeat Tom's acknowledgement of David Rickards and the gift of his aunt Estelle that triggered or commenced this process of engagement through a donation to Asthma Australia. And as Tom mentioned this morning, that was the genesis of our work here at Macquarie with Asthma Australia, and starting to reach out to a lot of the people in the room here today. We started that reaching out, and that was the genesis of this workshop. just reaching out to people. So thank you. That's all we want to say for today. Just thank you for everyone that's joined us here in person and online. We really appreciate the collaborative spirit of today and the willingness of people to come and join us from afar, and we really appreciate the spirit of the day. So thanks everyone.